So this is a cordillera, and the Chevron project is located in Kalinga. As of the end of December 2019, there were 121 hydropower projects in the Cordillera, including those that were already operational. All in all, this would generate this would have the capacity to power plants with 5,319.1 megawatts of electricity. Aside from the hydros, there are two geothermal power projects, and one of them is the one in Kalinga, which will have a plant capacity of 120 megawatts. There's another in Abra, but they haven't evaluated the geothermal resource properly yet, so they can't tell how much they can produce. The Kalinga geothermal project was actually first conceived in the 1980s during the time of the Marcos dictatorship. The area, the geothermal prospect, was evaluated by Caltex in 1982 to 1983. In 2010, the Kalinga Geothermal Project, or KGP, was awarded by the Department of Energy to Aragorn Power and Energy Corporation, a subsidiary of the Philippines Bell Corporation. But Aragorn and another Bell subsidiary, Guidance Management, will actually own only 40% of the project. 60% covering exploration, development, geothermal steam field operations, and all electricity generation concerns will be controlled by Caltex's parent company, Chevron. As originally conceived, the KGP would occupy 25,682 hectares in 3 municipalities of Kalinga, Pasil, Tinglayan, and Lubuagan. It would draw geothermal steam from the ancestral territories of 9 tribes, the Ableg, Balatok, Ginaang, and part of the Tulgao in Pasil, the Tulgao in Tinglayan, the Dananao, the Putbut, the Bangad, and the Sumadel, and Uma in Dubuagan. The geothermal power station would be located within the territory of the Balatok, which is the source of the hottest steam. Okay. Let me introduce you to the Kalinga. Each Kalinga tribe's territory holds carefully managed land resources, including springs and streams, grounds, old growth forests, which are conserved as watersheds, hunting grounds, sources of edible and medicinal plants and fungi, and sources of timber for building the houses of community members. Secondary growth forests from which firewood may be gathered and which can also be used for rotational swidden cultivation. Rice terraces, housing sites, shrublands or grasslands where carabao, horses, and cattle pasture. And then finally, small mining sites. To your left is the Kalinga village of Tomyangan, and to your right, the Kalinga village of Gawaan. Each tribe has its leaders, usually persons who have a respectable record in warfare, are holders of peace pacts with other tribes, are knowledgeable about customary law, are convincing orators, and have been successful enough in production and trade so that they are able to host large peace pact celebrations and shoulder the other burdens of holding peace pacts. But decision-making is not the monopoly of these leaders. Indeed, decisions can only be reached through the thorough discussion of issues by the entire community. Everyone has to agree, reach consensus gentium, before it can be said that a decision has been made. Each tribe has kuligong or satellite communities in the Kalinga capital town of Tabuk. Many elderly leaders have retired to this town. Both these elders and the other persons in the kuligong remain full-fledged members of their tribe with the same rights and responsibilities as those members who live in their home villages. They remain accountable to their tribe and to all the tribes with whom their own tribe has peace pacts. Peace pacts make two tribes mutually responsible for the safety, survival, and well-being of each and every one of their members. When consent for the KGP was solicited by Aragorn Power and Guidance Management, this was what happened. In 2011 to 2012, the announcement was made that the KGP had been granted free and prior informed consent by some of the Kalinga tribes that it would directly affect. The Tulgao and the Dananaw were named as two of the tribes that had granted FPIC. The Dananaw protested, saying this was totally false. The Tulgao said it was true that the document indicating consent had been signed by the Kuligong elders in Tabuk, but the rest of their tribe did not agree with these elders. Thus, the document of consent could not be considered valid. In 2012, Aragorn and Guidance Management tried to bribe tribes opposed to the project with gifts like furniture, equipment, and supplies for the rural health unit within their respective territories, new classrooms for the local schools, and so on. Assuming that the Uma tribe was sufficiently appeased with such gifts, Chevron installed some measuring equipment in their territory. The Uma tribe's members carefully dismounted and dismantled the equipment and returned them to Chevron. Also in 2012, various communities affected by the KGP organized an intertribal united front against the project. But most Pasil communities were absent from the activity in which this was launched. For the next 6 years, nothing happened with the project. But in 2019, it turned out that Aragorn and Guidance Management had quietly been working with a former officer of the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples to secure the consent of the Pasil tribes. Aragorn and Guidance Management easily convinced the Ableg and Balatok tribes to grant their consent to the project. But the Ginaang tribe proved stubborn in its refusal of the project until Guidance Management distributed cash incentives to barangay or village government councils and compensation money to each household of Ginaang. Before the year ended, the project had the consent of almost all of Pasil, with the exception of Barangay Culayo, which belonged to the Tulgao tribe based in the neighboring municipality of Tinglayan. Before the year ended, Chevron was able to commence exploration drilling within Balatok territory. On your screen is a photograph taken from atop a mountain, looking down at the Chevron exploration drilling site in Balatok. As originally conceived, the project would have tapped several geothermal sources in the 3 affected municipalities. As said, the hottest steam would be sourced from Balatok, the next hottest from the Dananaw territory. Geothermal well drilling and pipeline installation would disturb all the territories of the 9 affected tribes in the 3 municipalities. If it turns out that Chevron can undertake project development only in Pasil, the disturbance will be limited. But air, water, and soil pollution can still be expected, and over a much wider area, including the municipality of Tabuk. Now, the KGP will not only have that kind of impact, but also implications on peace pacts. The pollution may well turn out to be toxic to hunting, fishing, and agriculture, inasmuch as the area is highly mineralized and the geothermal steam or water sourced from it may carry high amounts of mercury, lead, antimony, and arsenic. Food production, indeed food security, is thus at risk. All the tribes who experience hunger may well blame the Pasil tribes, declare a violation of peace pact responsibilities, and thus a breach of the peace previously guaranteed by their pacts. In other words, the other tribes would have grounds for going to war against the tribes of Pasil, because it was they who granted consent to the KGP. So what can be done? The Pasil tribes can still rescind their decision to grant consent to the KGP and join the other tribes in actions against the project. We have been able to achieve this in other areas in the past, where indigenous communities gave their consent based on wrong information or because of bribery or because of threats. When the communities rescinded their consent, then the whole FPIC process had to be done again. The NCIP can still be compelled to recognize the anomalies made or the violations committed during the FPIC process. It is possible to sue Aragorn and Guidance Management in the NCIP court for bribery, fraud, and such. It is possible to file charges with the Ombudsman against the NCIP personnel involved. And it is also possible to file for a writ of environmental protection. To do any of the above, however, we need a lot of preparation in terms of documentation and unity building among the tribes of Kalinga and their Kuligong. There are 45 tribes, and if all these 45 tribes come together and persuade the Pasil tribes to change their minds about the project, then that will be very good. That's it.
Thank you so much for that very informative presentation. Now we will move on to our next speaker, Tyrone Beyer. Tyrone, feel free to turn on your camera.
Hello, good afternoon and good evening. Let me share my screen first. Hello, can you see? Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Hello? Yeah? Okay. So, what I will present this evening, this afternoon, is about dams and extractive industries in the Philippines and how they affect indigenous peoples and other people, other Filipino peoples in the Philippines, especially when it comes to natural calamities like typhoons. So the Philippines is visited by more than 10, maybe reaches up to 20 typhoons every year. So every year we expect storms, typhoons, strong winds, rains, and let me tell you what happened this late October to early November or mid-November. There are 4 storms which came almost one after the other. So first came Typhoon Rolly or Goni is its international name. It hit Bicol region and the rest of Luzon. But Typhoon Rolly, after hitting hard the Bicol region, it significantly weakened when it passed by the Sierra Madre mountain ranges in Quezon and Rizal. So when the storm passed by Metro Manila and other provinces, it was not that strong anymore. So there was no flooding like the one you see in the picture that's in Bicol. So almost all the provinces in Bicol were submerged or swept through by floods. Then before Typhoon Ulysses, there were two typhoons. Uh, we call that weaker ones, but it also brought rains. So actually, the flooding did not stop, especially in Bicol region. So when Typhoon Ulysses came, so we expected, because at first it was weaker. It was a weaker typhoon than Rolly. So when Typhoon Ulysses or Bangko came, so many expected that it's weaker, so it will also weaken when it comes to Metro Manila or Quezon Rizal provinces. But but a different scenario happened. Its impacts were actually worse and more widespread than that of Rolly. So, of course, it hit the already damaged Bicol region. And then when it came to the Sierra Madre Mountain Range and Quezon and Rizal, it did not weaken. It actually, the winds were maintained or were sustained, and rains came with it, strong rains and came with it. So there was flooding everywhere in Luzon. So we have floods in Metro Manila, that's the national capital region. So we were not spared by the Sierra Madre this time. And flooding in Rizal province. So this Rizal province is this place in the picture is in Daraitan, Tanay Rizal. It's actually downstream the impending Kaliwa Dam project, water supply, bulk water supply project by the Philippine government and water concessionaires to provide water for the people in Metro Manila. But actually, they're building a dam in Indigenous Peoples territories, in Dumagat territories. And yeah, this is what happened in Rizal province while there's no dam yet. So the the people in Rizal, in Quezon, are fearing for if ever the Kaliwa Dam will push through or will be operational. So they expect or they fear worse than what happened during the typhoon a week ago. So of course, there's also the widespread flooding in Cagayan. So almost the whole province of Cagayan and Isabela, its adjacent province is flooded. And of course, here in Cagayan is where many people have died through electrocution and drowning. And of course, there are big landslides, and the biggest landslide or soil erosion we experience is in Banawi, Ifugao. This is Sumigar in Viewpoint. In Viewpoint, Banawi, Ifugao, near the rice terraces, you call it the viewpoint where the tourists view the rice terraces. So it's near, and This is along the road. So there's a road and there's some quarrying operations going on, and it all collapsed. So of course, at least four people have died here, and not all have been recovered yet. So what caused this really? What caused this flooding? Is it, do we really blame the typhoons alone? What caused the landslides and other disasters that happened in homes and communities in the Philippines? So we think that the real cause why these typhoons bring about disasters and destruction is because of course, the deforestation in Rizal, Quezon, Cagayan, and Ifugao. So there's deforestation in these places. So if you go there, the trees, there are no longer trees in the mountains, so they are denuded already. There are efforts to reforest, but it's not yet it's not enough. Yeah, those reforestation efforts are not enough. And of course, the Magap Dam in Isabela and Ifugao, during the typhoon, when Typhoon Ulysses went to the northern part of Luzon, uh, the strong rains that came with it uh, the strong rains that came with it led to the opening of the floodgates or of the spillways of Magat Dam. So, of course, the Magat Dam is found in Isabela, but its water sources are in Ifugao, where in Ifugao, so its downstream area are valleys in Cagayan province and Isabela province. So that's what happened. The flooding we saw a while ago is mostly the result of the opening of the Magat Dam. And of course, quarrying or the gathering of non-metallic minerals in Rizal and other places in Luzon Island also led to the flooding and the landslides. So yeah, so these industries, these activities done mostly in indigenous peoples' territories are the cause why widespread flooding, destructive uh, erosion, and other disasters occur. Not only in indigenous peoples communities, but also in the non-indigenous areas. Yeah, like the plains in Metro Manila, Cagayan, Rizal, and Quezon. So, what can we say about all of this? So, of course, we believe that these storms and the rain that come with those storms are brought about by climate change. And of course, IPs, as we all know, have contributed the least to the climate crisis because of sustainable livelihood practices. Of course, not all of indigenous peoples have sustainable livelihood practices at present, but for a long time they have uh, those kinds of practices or livelihood. And of course, indigenous peoples were the first to, or were at the forefront in resisting deforestation and forest degradation. They also fought extractive industries, and they contributed significantly to lowering gas emissions historically and up to present. And then, but here are the vulnerabilities of indigenous peoples. We have fragile ecosystems. Of course, there's the continuous development activities in IP areas, but they are aggressive development activities, not really developmental for indigenous peoples and communities. CC mitigation or climate change mitigation options violate IP rights, unsure rights over lands and resources. We have no rights, or we are not given full control of our lands and resources. Mitigation and adaptation strategies of IPs are not recognized. So here are some of our recommendations, and of course we view it as an IP rights issue. So greater effort should be exerted to involve indigenous peoples in defining effective adaptation strategies, recognition of IP self-determined development, of course FPIC when it comes to big projects in indigenous communities, and of course the IP's worldviews and their IKSP or indigenous knowledge systems seem to be their best weapons against impacts of climate change. And of course, we also consider UNDRIP as an overarching framework with ecosystems and gender. So here, indigenous peoples have the right to lands, territories, and resources. Indigenous peoples have the right to own, use, develop, and control these lands and territories and resources that they possess of freestone of traditional ownership. And of course, the states shall give legal recognition, and they should give legal recognition and protection to these lands, territories, and resources, because these are the last frontiers of our planet and of our whole communities, even non-indigenous peoples communities. So that's all, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tyrone, for that important contribution and reminder of the cumulative impact of these unsustainable practices on Indigenous peoples. Next, we will go to Dmitry Berezhkov. So please turn on your camera.
Hello, do you hear me? Hello? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you
yes.
very much. I'm really sorry. My presentation, I cannot open it. Something wrong. So maybe I can tell about my story. My name is Dmitry Berezhkov, and I represent Abergant Forum. It's an indigenous informal network of indigenous organizations and leaders in Russian Federation. And this is informal status of the network because the Russian government now is pressed and oppressed indigenous organizations and all civil society in Russian Federation and announced them as foreign agents. And there are a lot of types of criminalization of indigenous activities now. So we work as informal network. And actually, we wrote this summer a letter to Elon Musk, the CEO of the Tesla company, which produce electrical vehicles. And we wrote it because of several reasons. And in this letter, we asked to not buy nickel and other metals from Nornickel company, which located in Russia mainly. Nornickel company produce nickel and other metals in Taimyr region and Murmansk region, where indigenous peoples live: Sami, Nenets, Nanasan, Ensi, Dalgan, Evenki communities. And in these territories, indigenous peoples continue their traditional livelihood, like reindeer herding, fishing, hunting, gathering. And originally these were indigenous people's traditional territories. But Nornickel company already worked there for maybe several decades, since the middle of 20th century. And now the areas where Nornickel company work is a kind of moon landscape because it's polluted, the rivers are dirty, and there are a lot of destroyed traditional lands there. And actually, Nornickel company is one of the biggest world's producers of sulfur dioxide. Its emissions, it's about 2 million tons per year, which is half of sulfur dioxide emissions in Russia, and twice then total amount of emissions from, for example, such big state as United States. So the factories in Norilsk in the Russian Arctic is the world's largest stationary source of man-made sulfur dioxide, according to Greenpeace. And also there are it's only systematic pollution, but also there are all other accidents and violations of environmental law, and there are a lot of spills. But why we wrote this letter? In the last days of this spring, Nornickel company was a source of... Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we still hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Was a source of gigantic oil spill. It was not oil, it was oil products. About 20,000 tons of diesel oil were spilled in the rivers of Taimyr Peninsula. And now we, according to our representatives there are not fish in the local rivers where these products were spilled. And this is one of the biggest oil spill of the history, and in Russia and also in the world. And actually, we find out that Elon Musk applied to the nickel producers of around the world and asked them to produce more nickel by sustainable way, as he mentioned. And he asked them to, he applied to them, and he said that he agreed to sign a gigantic contract for several years. For producing Tesla vehicles. And that's why we wrote this letter. So asked him not to buy until the company will not apply several points. So if conducts a full independent assessment of the environmental damage of mining for nickel and other metals in Taimyr and Murmansk, compensates indigenous communities for damages done for their traditional way of life, prepares and implement plan of recultivating contaminant lands in Taimyr Peninsula and Murmansk region, and revise its policies for engaging of indigenous peoples into their decision making and respect their free, prior, informed consent for approval on any projects. As we know now, Nornickel start negotiating with the Russian government and with several indigenous organizations, and said that they will pay the compensation. It was about 2 billion rubles, and they will produce a plan for social and economic development of indigenous peoples. Unfortunately, the experts and the indigenous leaders who involved in this assessment, which now organized by Nornickel, they are also paid by Nornickel before this accident, and that's why indigenous communities in Murmansk and in Taimyr said that they not believe into such assessment and into such program. So we think that Nornickel company tried to fake this activity. And now I can say that we start negotiations with Tesla company, and that was just a discussion. And also we believe that Nornickel have to really apply for free primal informed consent and respect indigenous people's rights and not fake it. And also I can say that we wrote a new letter to BASF company, which is one of the biggest producer of the electric batteries in Europe. And also we know that they have business with Nornickel. We hope that these activities and this campaign, which was supported a lot of different environmental and human rights organizations around the world, and also by indigenous organizations. And thank you very much for them who support this campaign. We believe that this will help indigenous communities in Taimyr and Murmansk to negotiate with Nornickel company. I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dmitry. Okay, great. Once again, if you have any questions for any of our presenters, since there's so few of us, I'm going to invite you to turn on your video and your sound so that you can ask them directly. You can direct it to any one of our speakers or to all our panelists. Go ahead, Philip.
Hello, yeah, I'm Philip from RLI. My question would go to Dmitry. Thank you for presenting on your, what at the end sounds like a success story. So I was wondering, like, how would you, or what would you name as like the key success factor that eventually you reached Tesla and Elon Musk on following like your demands? Like what was the most effective measure in your campaign?
It's a very difficult question. I'm not sure that I'm ready to answer very clear on such questions, but that's actually it's a very good question, and thank you very much for this. First of all, they were difficult for indigenous communities, and we had such experience to apply for company who buy raw materials from Russia previously, like coal or energy, or like oil or gas, because you know, it's very difficult to negotiate with them because they don't too much care about who we buy, who them buy from raw materials. And of course they organize some policies, and they try to negotiate with international law, but that was difficult. But with situation with Tesla and other such producers, it's a bit maybe different situation, because the buyers of their products, like people who buy electric vehicles, and we're not talking about only Tesla, we are talking about the general car industry who will involved in this business, like Mercedes and other companies. They are really, they sell their products for people who buy a very expensive vehicles. And why these people buy these vehicles? Because they also think about their future and about environment maybe. And that's why this campaign was a bit different than previous campaigns. And I think that negative influence of not applied to indigenous people's rights could affect also these buyers, because they think about the environment themselves.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We did have a question for Lulu from Adnan. Do you want to go ahead and ask that question? I know you guys answered in chat, but it's good to
Yes,
keep the dialogue going.
I would restate maybe the question. I think he already answered me, but nevertheless, to let others also hear. The question is how likely that to strengthen the relationship between those tribes, which you have mentioned in your very nice presentation, and to avoid any individual decisions by those tribes against each other in favor of Chevron project. Thank you.
It's really very difficult to do it now, but I think we can do it eventually. Chevron has pulled out temporarily from the area because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also because of the pandemic, we are unable to convene huge gatherings of the various tribes. Inter-community gatherings will bring together many communities and maybe hundreds of people, and it's hard to do now. During the time of actually this is what we aim to achieve, no? Bring the people together so they can talk. During the time of our struggle against the Chico dance, this is what we did. We used the Peace Pact system to forge unity among tribes, among multiple tribes, so that everyone would fight against a common enemy, which were the dams. That's what we want to do again now. The pandemic is an obstacle, however.
Excellent. Thank you. And a great reminder that in the midst of the global pandemic, this has created even more obstacles in terms of organizing and building movements and solidarity at the local and regional level. Tyrone, maybe you could talk a little bit more about why the dams are being pushed by the government, and is this the right climate change solution for the Philippines?
Yes, actually dams are have proven already to cause massive flooding, and especially in lowland areas. But the government still considers it as a big development project, or a project that will develop or help communities. But of course, actually it's all business, because utilities such as energy utilities, the one providing household electricity and water, the water supply in industries and homes are owned by private corporations. Of course, they are local corporations, but recent government policies also allow foreign companies to invest in what we call that, water supply, energy generation and distribution, among other industries. So the people are at a loss when it comes to this, because they are saying that the indigenous peoples need to sacrifice a piece of their land or a part of their river, so that more people will benefit. Because, for example, the Kaliwa Dam that will be built in Quezon and Rizal, where where I showed the flooded area, which is actually the downstream after a storm with heavy rains. They plan to build a dam there, and they say that the Kaliwa Dam will provide water for residents in Metro Manila, the one also that was flooded during the Typhoon Ulysses. So, you know, this will bring more disaster, but the government is not listening. But of course, indigenous peoples and our advocates are still shouting or is still fighting against these dam projects. And we tell the government that these are not needed anymore. There are alternatives to provide water, electricity in households, yeah, and in communities. Thank you.
May I say something?
Yes, go ahead, Lulu.
Okay, I'd like to add that the government is using the impact of the pandemic on the economy to push its build, build, build program. And the Kaliwa Dam, as well as a dam, a mega dam in Apayao, are among the projects in this build, build, build program. Actually, these dams are not needed for power generation. We're not short on energy in Luzon. If you build all the dams that are outlined by the government, for example, in the Cordillera, we'll have too much electricity and they'll have trouble selling it anyway. But it's the building itself that's big business, the construction process.
That's an excellent point, Lulu.
Can I add another?
Lulu, go ahead.
Yeah, fast. This will be quick. Of course, the build is, for example, the Kaliwa Dam is a loan from China. So the Philippines, actually, as a country, will not benefit from that because China has imposed provisions that will really make the Philippines more indebted as a country and as a people. And then I mentioned the flooding in Cagayan was caused by the Magat Dam, which the water comes from Ifugao and it's built downstream the river from Ifugao. They are also building another dam in Ifugao, which will actually feed also to the Magat Dam, the Alimit Dam. So yeah, that will cause. Actually, they want to build that project. And, yeah, the people in Ifugao are protesting also, but it seems that the government wants to build these structures. Okay.
Wow. Very great points. And we'll continue this conversation in a general dialogue at the end. Katrine, do you have something?
Yeah, I would have a question as well to Tyrone and Lulu, if that is okay at the moment.
Yes.
Because I was wondering, I mean, we saw the devastating consequences of this big dam project. Do you have any experience, or what is your view on like the small scale hydropower projects? So do you have it in your areas, and are these like running okay? Because I mean that's a big difference, and I was just wondering, like, what is your perspective on the smaller scale projects?
Yeah, one of our partners in Philippine Task Force for Indigenous Peoples Rights, the Civil ng Aghamat Teknolohiya or CIBAT, has built together with Cordillera NGOs several micro hydropower projects in the Cordillera. These are community-based, people-controlled micro hydro projects. Actually, the first project was built in Nibat, Tinglayan, Kalinga, one of those affected by the Chico Dam that was mentioned by Lulu a while back. So
and by Chevron.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is also where Chevron is will be yeah, located. So yeah, they if if the people want to develop themselves or they want the energy, water for themselves, they can build it as long as yeah. So there's no need to go for large scale uh, projects that will eventually destroy their environment and ancestral lands. So we can go community based and people controlled.
Excellent. So now we're going to go to the second portion of our event, and we're going to begin with a presentation from Ikal around the work protecting Lake Turkana. Ikal, can you turn on your video?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm in very bad network. Sorry, I can't put on my video. My network will collapse if I go on video. So I'm just going to jump in and give a context of Lake Turkana and the renewable energy projects that we've had around the region. So in few years back, the focus and everybody's been saying, let's shift to renewable energy. And we've really been trying to think, what does that mean for us here? The first time it was the Gibe 3 dam on the Omo River. And then after that, we started to see an expansion of Gibe 4 and Gibe 5 along the same Omo River. And the Omo River is within Ethiopia, is a shared river between Kenya and Ethiopia. And I hope the background noise is not too bad. Okay, thank you. So yeah, so the Omo River is a shared river between Kenya and Ethiopia, and this is a place where indigenous communities have lived. So the Omo tribes in Ethiopia, the Turkana in Kenya, the Rendile, the Elmolo, which is the smallest tribe in smallest tribe in Africa, and then you have the Gabra and the Borana. So we've had, it's a place full of indigenous people. And this whole idea of an expansion, increase of energy, and the need to expand energy in the region was really pushed by the African Development Bank and other banks, the World Bank, who stated that Africa is a dark continent and we need to expand our energy. And at that time, the push for something called the power pools. So you have the East African power pool in the East African region where we are. You have the West African power pool where in the west of the country, of the continent, and then you have the Southern power pool. And the idea is that very many countries generate power and it is passed through a pool, more centralization of energy, but bringing in a lot of power. And so we started to question around, what does the Gibe Dam do and how it impacts and stops water flowing downstream. And we started to look at it. Various things happen. So like many dams, like all comrades have said before me, the impact of the displacement of communities, displacement of livelihoods. The region is made up of indigenous communities who are pastoralists, fisher folk, and farmers. So we see it as a three-legged stool where the fishing, the agriculture, and the pastoralism are the three legs of the stool. And if you pull one out, then how it impacts, and you cannot sit on a two-legged stool. So those are the sort of, we've seen that displacement of livelihoods. Many times they say, how do you displace communities? Because you're pastoralists, you're nomads, and you move. But then the ignorance of the other livelihoods that communities have depended on is what we've seen as unjust for indigenous communities. With the Gibe 3, Gibe 4, which is now called the Koisa Dam, and the Gibe 5 Dam, we're seeing a situation where the water downstream into the Lake Turkana is thank you very much for that. Yes, so the downstream water that flows into Lake Turkana is reduced, and with that reduction, you see a situation where because Lake Turkana is a closed lake. It's a closed basin lake. It has an inlet but no outlet, so it depends on evaporation. It is a saline lake, but then it's still people use it for drinking water, and it is the largest desert lake in the world. So communities, it's about 300,000 people who depend on it directly, and about 700,000 indirectly, both on the eastern shores and the western shores of the lake. And so we've really been trying to question the whole push for hydro. And I think one of the biggest challenges has been, this narrative that it's not fossil and it is hydro, it is renewable, and so we should all accept it. But we've really been pushing and demanding for a just energy generation, mini dams, because most of them are really large dams. The size of the Gibe 3 dam is almost the size of Lake Turkana, and having seen what we've seen in the Aral Sea and in Lake Chad, we are very cautious of what is likely to happen. Again, on the eastern shores of the lake, there is the Lake Turkana wind power, which is the largest wind farm in the world at the moment. If not the world, it's in Africa. And this is, again, green energy, renewable energy, which is good, which is seen to be good, but this has taken up lands of communities. It's taken about 300,000 hectares of land, of pastoralist land, of grazing areas, migration routes. And right now, because of what is seen as idle land, the valuation of land for weather compensation or livelihood is very minimum. What is paid to the Marsabit County government, because the land tenure system in Kenya is that as of now, community land is held in trust by the county government. So the land, payments were made to the county council of Marsabit, and now the county government of Marsabit, and the amount paid was equal to about 3,000 euros for a year use of the land. And this money never really gets to communities. And what was then used instead, so there was no free, prior, informed consent. What was used was the first meeting where communities were discussing, what is going to be done, what could be done, how, what is this project? That's what was used, and later canvassed as free, prior, informed consent, which meant that communities didn't have a right to say no, or even to determine what amount of land was taken from communities, and even to negotiate migration, how the animals pass in and around the wind turbines. Right now, communities were displaced, and the amount payable or paid to households was 150 euros. And that's full payment, not an annual fee. That was full compensation payment, which was, again, not in line with the Kenyan laws on compensation, because at that particular point, we didn't have a resettlement action plan for the project. And what was there did not talk about compensation. So you're seeing a loss of land, a loss of livelihood, but more so a loss of identity by communities, because then the push for, we will compensate you, we'll give you land, but people then end up moving, and the amount they're compensated cannot allow them to buy land anywhere else, because the value of land away from customary land then gets more expensive. So you're seeing an issue of, redistributive injustices, procedural injustices, because of the situation where these communities' poverty levels are high. The narrative by the state, but also by the transnational companies, is all around CSR and jobs, for unskilled labor, informal labor for communities, which has led to a lot of not only the displacement, the dispossession, but also the tensions within communities. So the fact that, yes, communities are not homogeneous has really created elite capture, has created a lot of tensions within communities for those who then benefit from contracts or negotiate on the basis that they will get contracts. So we're seeing all this happening at a time when the push away from fossil fuels, the push for renewable energies in a way to address the climate impacts is high. But at the same time, there's no real, thought around what is just, even within a transition for climate justice. especially within indigenous territories. So it's something that we're seeing, and we're seeing it expanding, you know, because there's no free, prior, informed consent. And even within the discussions of free, prior, informed consent, the question of what is free, because then the information you get is on the basis that you will perhaps agree to transact for corporate social responsibility. So you get information. So it no longer is free because you're transacting for it. Prior, so how much prior should you get this information? And those are sort of questions we're now starting to ask. How long does it take for somebody to be informed about something, and who, you know, bringing in not only the indigenous communities of where the project is supposed to be based, but also the other indigenous communities who have territorial rights, who have access rights or user rights, and how to bring them on the table. Who then gets informed, and what is the process of getting consent? Because you find a group of a few people who have been supported, who have been either promised jobs, or who are the political elite. Then, and we're seeing that especially in Turkana with this whole leadership summit, where you find the political leaders claim to provide consent on behalf of communities. And it is a trend now. We are starting to think around how best to do it, and considering that our land tenure system is starting to weaken customary tenure, customary institutions for a very formal setup where it's, you know, land management committees who usually fit within the political elite structures. So it's a thing that we are seeing happening, and we constantly now are starting to question this just transition from fossils, but also this just transition for energy. What we are now also asking is around how to change the energy generation approach, so that we are not looking at large infrastructure, but really asking ourselves, how do we start to push for small micro dams, runoff rivers, things that we really can decentralize our energy systems? Because even as much as we want a just system within indigenous communities, but because the economic structure, the generation of energy at a very macro level really continues to have indigenous people just falling in line with what the state wants, rather than developing their own economic thought process, economic, you know, imagine their way of economy that would enable the real and just growth of indigenous communities, rights to energy, rights to development, but in a way that fits within an indigenous economy. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Excellent, extremely great points. Next, we're going to go to our final speaker, Hama Wapachana, who's going to present on their work protecting the Amazon. Hama, can you turn on your video? Hi.
Everyone hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello, good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure. I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, you look very beautiful today. Yes.
Because my internet is not old. Okay. Thank you. I'm Jama Wapichana. I'm from Brazil. I live here in the border than I'm indigenous. I'm from indigenous people here, Makushi, Katam. So I'm very happy to be here. Here together with yours to be sharing the soul of the Amazon, sharing a part with where I live, how we defending the Amazon here in our place. I'm so sorry. I don't know where. I don't know where I put my hands. I can. Hello.
We can still hear you.
I can. Okay. Okay. I don't know what happened with this my computer. So I will talk. I come share here a little part of the Amazon sold my realities and present in this Brazilian Amazon. I think it's not. The time is so difficult to talk. But the indigenous people here in Brazilian are resistant of the government, resistant of the lot of things what's happening. We have a movement towards. We are passing for hard time, but we will survive. So the voices and the saying of the Amazon is a message of life. I don't know how I will talk because when we talk about Amazon talk about the people who live here. This diverse people who live here. So indigenous, traditional who live in these communities, have quilombolas, other peoples, people who live near of the river. The lot of diversity face live here. But we are together fighting with the government. Here in Brazil, the situation is disregarded. It's not good for us, especially in this time of pandemic. Here in the north part of Brazil, we have a big problem with them illegal miners and indigenous territory. Do you hear me, please?
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Okay. We have 2020. Starting. Hello.
Yes.
My internet is good.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we can hear you. I'm going to share some pictures while you're talking.
Okay. So here in Roraima, we have a big situation. What's happening with the indigenous Yanomami? Yanomami is so vulnerable people who was enfrenting 2,000 gold miners in the area. How the people have affected, specific in this time of pandemic. We have a lot of indigenous people in whole Brazil and there in this frontier too, this bordering, people dying because the miners, them gold miners are entering the communities. So this is the voices come from the Amazonia. The voices come from Brazil. This is one of the problem have here. Demarcation, them land we don't have here too. We have a big fight with the government. They want to open the indigenous territory to miner illegal. But we stay more strong. When you talk about Amazonia, defend the Amazonia is defend our mother Earth. The relation what we have with Amazonia, with the earth, with the land, is like our mother. The relation we have with our river or plants is more than land. It's our life. We are together. We are connected. it's this message I want to share with yours. We are connected. Like, and this my place, what happened in this actual situation. This year, June to September month, we have a big area in the Amazonia, Pantanal was burning. And November month now we are feeling here in the north part. In summertime, the rain are coming here and in the border, than Guyana, Venezuela. Then people who live in the community, they not know what happened. It's time to. We don't know how I think, you know. It's a lot of things happening. Is we need to just exclaim it now. Here in Roraima, my place, last year we have working together with network with Repan. Repan is network Rede Pan-Amazônia, and other institute we has training pollinators course on climate change, inviting them people from traditional community here at the university, diversity realities, and training them to go to them to work on them bases. What's happened with them? What happened with the climate? Peoples of the far of the cities, them don't know what's happened. The time of the fish to plant, it's very different. How them big cities are affecting the small population who live in far places. So we started doing this course, training them people from the bus to go to work and to share this information. What is happening with our land? The time is chosen all the time. Then people don't know, the parents, the indigenous, other diversity don't know what will be happening. The time of plant, time to go fish, to see the animals, you know, how them survivor. Here we are doing our work. We are resistant. We are resistant in this small place and this on our place, because the Amazon is the world. And this year we have a 2 meeting, assembly of the World Assembly of the Amazon in July. The voice war. Everyone, every planet, the whole planet, we have to Amazonize ourselves. This is the message for all the human beings who live in the world. Take this Amazonia, this Pan-Amazonia is our own. We are part from this whole Amazonia. This is a Mama Earth, Pachamama, our mother. We have to share this message to all the human beings who live in this planet. So we continue doing our work together with them network, with them movement Indigenous, what we have stopping because the pandemic has affected us here. But we trying to resist, because we have we ancestry have helping us, the mother earth. So this is the message from the movement, indigenous movement from Roraima, from the teams for Roraima, from the Brazil. We are connected. We have in our place protecting the Amazon. Share this message for all human beings from this planet. Thank you. Thank you. Is that?
Thank you so much. So now we go into our second portion of our Q&A for our last two speakers. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please turn on your video. Yes, very powerful talks indeed. Are there any questions? I'm going to invite everyone to turn on their videos at this point if you can, if your bandwidth allows you to, so that we can close this session off in a more interactive way. Any questions for Hama or Ikal? Very powerful talks to both of you. I will have a question for you both. As we heard from our previous speakers, COVID-19 is creating obstacles for organizing in this moment, and the discussions happening on a global scale to build and to develop and expedite development in several different ways, while we're still grappling with many of the rights issues, human rights violations, and climate change challenges that our Indigenous peoples' territories are experiencing. How has COVID-19 changed the challenges you guys are facing in your homelands?
So I'll start and then, so one of the things we're seeing is, as you've said, the push, this, because of everything slowing down because of COVID economy-wise, we're seeing governments, using the directives, government directives to limit people from coming together. So the aspect of organizing needs communities to come together. But then you're also seeing in most of these communities, access to internet, to some phone network, some level of phone network is minimized. So you find, things have passed and the local government saying, we have discussed this on WhatsApp, we have discussed this on Facebook, yet the real access for communities to get this information is 2 days later and things have been passed. So you're seeing the loss of gains by communities in where they could question authority, they could hold to account authority. We've really lost on that based on this, but also on the need to say, oh, the state is looking for ways to make it a conducive environment, quote unquote, conducive environment for investors to come in. So weakening the processes that investors need to go through and the push for it. It was very interesting recently to see the power company in Kenya complaining that too many people are going off grid and into renewable energies. But then we are yet to see what does that impact, because they're saying, I think it's because the funniest thing is out of its inefficiency, more and more people are now going into renewable energy. And what will that mean for now that the states need to still control the energy sector, and how that happens in terms of land, but also giving more opportunities even for that renewable energy to investors. So we are seeing the space for Indigenous communities to even come together to share, to learn from each other, because we are realizing that more and more of these developments are happening in Indigenous spaces. So you don't have to, it could be different companies, but it is the same, same playbook that they're all using, but we've just not had the time, but also just the opportunity to come together, mainly based on government directives. Ironically, the same government directives are broken by the state actors when they're politically moving around for their own interests.
Hama, do you have anything to add to that? Okay, she may be experiencing some difficulties. Philip, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, and actually, it's now 2 questions already because I liked very much, Ikal, what you said about the power companies. They don't like that people are starting to go off grid or to buy their own solar. And I think we have a similarity in Germany, or it's a global thing that renewables kind of bring literally power back to the people to, on one hand, generate your own power and be independent from what is usually organized as a top-down central approach, being independent from the grid. And so I really liked your comment. And the question I had, or I have, is that maybe to give you some background, at RLI, we are a not-for-profit research institute. We are based in Germany, but we work in international projects. And usually the funding comes from also international organizations. And I heard about your experience, for example, with the World Bank. So we are just in a process of reflecting how we can design our projects better. And my direct question to you would be, like, how is your advice for like international organizations, researchers? How can they better include the view of indigenous people, of local people, and if you even can recommend some networks we could approach for such projects.
Thanks, Philip. I think like everybody, you know, we've seen this whole discussion on decolonizing research, indigenizing research. I think the participatory approach is always good, but not participatory on paper. Most people talk about it when they're writing the proposal, participatory, but they find the process too tiring to be participatory, and that power dynamics that indigenous people take their time to own the research, to, you know, understand the research. And I think that's going to be very important, so that it may take time in the beginning, but it's such a smooth sail after that. And because we want the research to go beyond just paper, that it makes sense for communities. And so especially within even as we see the shift to renewables, I think the one thing that not much work has been done is really, how do you not just shift the technology, but shift the power, real power. So it's the power generation that is, a lot of the technology shifts the power generation, but the actual power, where the economic conversations, where the ownership, because really it doesn't matter if it is, you can imagine if Shell is running a renewable energy in an indigenous community, but then it's owned by Shell. So communities there, you're just peasant workers. But how do we start to get to see whether it's land as natural capital, but more so just to see how research can not only be done within indigenous territories, but can be deliberate towards really shifting the power, not only the knowledge production, but also the actual ways that indigenous communities can own what comes out of this research. So it's, you know, people call it biased, but I think it's those are the sort of things that will start to make research really indigenous, really owned by the people, but also embraced by the people. So those are the sort of you know, quick thoughts I could come out at top of my head.
Thank you very much. I think this is you perfectly described the reality we are facing when designing research projects, and then reflecting, then putting in some critical self-reflection. Was it just for winning the grant, or was it really for including the people? So I think this where I even if it's recorded here, I want to be that honest and open that I've really experienced this. And but we're working on it, and I think, for example, this workshop is one way to tackle it, that you can share the experiences, and, for example, what's important is to connect and to really then have the linkages, which are not so easy to build from Berlin to different regions in the world. So very grateful for this opportunity here.
Excellent. Are there any other questions, or even among our presenters, if you have any questions for each other?
If I can just add on the question for Ikal, on the Indigenous Peoples Major Group is not a research institution. It's an advocacy network organization, but we could partner with research institutions to conduct how they call that, researches on indigenous communities. But again, as Ikal mentioned, no, because there's this research fatigue of many indigenous communities, and they're also losing trust for many researchers because information are being extracted out from communities, sometimes without their free, prior, and informed consent. And this information that's taken from them is analyzed on the perspective of the writer, which sometimes provides a misconception about that indigenous community. It's not the proper analysis that the communities wanted. So it's important that in the process of these academic researches, indigenous peoples are involved and really own the information and are able to use the information for their own advocacy at the country level, because information is a powerful tool for many indigenous communities. And if it's brought back to them in a language and form understood by them, of course, that would have cost implications on translations and simplification, but that's just the way it is, no? When you talk about participatory researches. And just on the discussion on renewable energy, there's also a risk there, no, for the mini hydro projects, because there are these companies are also that are taking advantage of this in saying that these are mini hydro, these are not environmentally destructive. But then these companies are there to just extract from the community and then just give them some school projects or some scholarships, and then they take the resources and then they take the profit out of the community. So the Right Energy Partnership of the Indigenous Peoples Major Group is the community initiated and owned renewable energy project. That's the one that we are promoting, as Tyrone mentioned. It has to be community initiated and community owned. It has to be in line with the development priorities of the community. And it has to directly benefit the community, not a company coming in, bringing in a mini hydro project and then taking out the resources and the profit and leaving nothing for indigenous peoples. Because our experience, even those having mega dams or mini hydro projects, it's the host communities who don't even have electricity. And this electricity is being used in the big cities or other industries, no? So it really has to be owned and it has to benefit the communities. Oh, I'm Roby with the Indigenous Peoples Major Group Secretariat.
Excellent point, Roby. And instead of going into breakout groups, we're going to go ahead and just have our main discussion here in the plenary. And so I invite everyone again to turn on your video if you can. It gives us the feeling of being together, even though we're meeting virtually. But I do understand if you do not have the bandwidth in order to do that. This is actually one of the fundamental things and challenges that we'll need to be addressing as we look at post-COVID recovery responses and development approaches for climate change solutions. Broadband access is also an important infrastructure to enable renewable energy solutions and the development of decentralized smart grids. And so the needing to operate from the nexus of looking at water, energy, food systems, and broadband infrastructure is really one of the ways that we can approach holistic solutions. But as many of our presenters have indicated, to do this in and around Indigenous peoples' territories and lands requires these rights-based approaches, these human rights frameworks that center and protect Indigenous knowledges, territories, communities, as well as their visions for development for their own peoples, in order to do and implement these solutions in a sustainable and just way. However, with the way that people are approaching development now, one of the issues that keeps coming up is the way renewable and sustainable can be used as a label for many harmful projects because the impact of these projects is not measured as a whole. For example, here in the United States, one of the things that our Indigenous peoples are having to grapple with, particularly my people from the Navajo Nation in the Southwest United States, is the marketing of nuclear energy as a renewable energy. They're kind of backtracking now because we pushed very hard against that, because uranium sourced from the lands and territories of my peoples has an endemic legacy affecting public health, as well as the environmental health and sustainability of many of our resources and our ecosystem functions. But now it's being promoted as a transitional energy that's necessary in order to make the shift to more renewable energy sources. And even when projects are structured around solar energy, our wind farms, the purpose of those projects is to produce power for major corporations to sell through their main grid systems, which our people are not tapped into and do not directly benefit the communities that have served as resource colonies for many of these energy companies for generations. And so this is why this work is so important, and why exchanging knowledge with one another is very important. Many of these energy corporations are connected and utilize similar strategies, approaches to governance and development of laws, policies, and regulations. Despite the differences of our regions, our peoples, our languages, we are often dealing with an opposition and development actors that operate by a similar playbook. And so when we think about solutions, it's important to have these opportunities to share strategies with one another. So one of our first questions for our group discussion is, what are some other examples of holistic and sustainable solutions and inclusive solutions for climate justice that we can learn from? And anyone can speak at this point.
Yes, do you hear me? Yes, this is Adnan from Ali. I guess I would like us to add one of the lessons learned. I would say, from my perspective, that the communities or those indigenous people has to act at the early stage of the project. So that means, as Ms. Jimenez mentioned, they cannot act now because it's too late. So we could be reasons that those communities has to act from the beginning. If there are a new project, they don't need to wait for the government to come or something like that. They have to act by themselves. They have to make a lobby by themselves and to take it seriously from the beginning. Otherwise, we'll be affected by those powerful either companies or decisions so far. Thank you.
Yes, Katrin?
Yeah, I would have a question, but it's a bit more like, it's not really related to what you were asking. I hope it's still okay. It just popped into my mind. Because we were talking before about those energy projects where big companies were involved. And while working in Thailand was an island community, I was asking myself as well, like, well, is it okay or not okay to collaborate with big companies? The situation was that there was already a community microgrid in place, and they're like running it and operating it themselves, and they did the the economics behind it as well, but then it was time to replace some assets as well. And then like a big oil company from like based in Thailand came in saying like, oh yes, we can finance, for example, a new diesel generator and some solar panels, like as a corporate social responsibility project. So they wanted to kind of greenwash a bit their image. So they were then putting like little signs on the island, like, okay, this big company financed the assets on the island, and they kind of gave it to the community. So it was still like in the hands of the community, so they could still operate it and so on. But there, I really felt weird as well. Like, what is your perspective on this? So I mean, there were everywhere like this little signs of this big oil company who is obviously not the greenest, and they wanted to greenwash their image somehow, but still like the community itself couldn't really afford like the replacement of the assets on the island. So they felt very undecided as well. What is the way to go? Like to cooperate with the big company or not? But I mean, that this is a special case. It's not like they are putting big solar plants there to use the energy themselves, but still it felt a bit weird. So I'm just curious about your perspective here.
It's a difficult question and situation indeed. Any of my colleagues have a response?
I would, yeah, from my point of view, it's a really nice point, but from my point of view, those people in any way has to cooperate, because if they do not cooperate and those powerful companies, yeah, they will not take care about them. Okay, they have to cooperate, but at the same time, they have to put all their concerns on the table. Okay, either they have to emphasize on social responsibility of those companies, or to be the board of the project, at least to give insights or predict risks that could affect on their income or something like that. Yeah, it's my point of view.
And this comes up a lot in our territories and in many developed nations where Indigenous peoples and their governance systems have actually been structured by our federal governments to promote those types of collaborations in our communities. And so one of the things that we do as grassroots organizers is we recognize that this problem is so big and so complex and has long histories in our communities. And so to respond to it, we have to respond from every different way that we can. And so, for example, with the fracking industries and natural gas exploration, there are families living in endemic poverty who see the benefits of entering into lease negotiations with oil companies, for example. And so what we have done and try and continue to do is work with those people to ensure that they truly understand the environmental and health impacts of living so close to oil and gas wells. And that if they still want to continue into those negotiations or into those partnerships, to ensure that they advocate for themselves in a way that protects their rights and ensures that there's some sort of redress mechanism should at some point they realize the impacts are too much for their families or for their communities. It's not a perfect way because we still organize on the other side against these companies for the violations of environmental regulations and policies and protections that they're supposed to be abiding by, but also for some of the secondary impacts of these types of extractive industries, such as the bringing in of labor camps, which we are dubbed man camps in our communities, which bring with it increased violence and drug use and trafficking trafficking of women and girls. And so the best way that we can do this is as organizers is really map out all of the power dynamics and make sure that in every engagement, we are doing our best to hold people accountable fundamentally to our values as Indigenous peoples, to our human rights, as well as to what economic justice and what transition needs to look like and mean for our communities. But it is a very complicated situation and something that I think comes up in a lot of our communities, especially when we're dealing with such scarcity, manufactured scarcity of resources and of investment. A lot of times that leaves us in positions, as we heard from many of our presenters, where the promise of jobs are the promise of investment, and usually these are just like, this is just chump change, right? It's just trinkets compared to what these corporations can afford and do. But when people are promised, you know, these little payoffs, it's really hard for communities to resist some of those investments because of what they're dealing with, the reality on the ground. So we have to attack this from all fronts. Shirley, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Yes, I cannot hear myself, but can you hear me? Okay, so I would just like also to share our experience regarding, so there's a plan to put a dam upstream from my village. And then, but before the company came, what they did was to come up with small projects. Like if I came from town going home to my village, so I would see this water project is provided by, and then in my community itself, where we usually have the village hall, so this project is, and then in other parts of the community. And now comes the dam that should be put up like upstream from my village. So there's like a division in the community because there are people who said, oh, they're going to bring irrigation, they're going to build the roads and give jobs for economics to uplift the life of our people. But then, so some of us, so we formed a group, and then we did some petitions, we set up like Facebook groups. And then, so actually just last week we had a dialogue. The National Commission on Indigenous Peoples asked the group of those who petition, which is us, and the people who wants to pursue the dam together with the company. But in the end, it was a deadlock, even after what happened, like what I think Tyrone have shared about the flooding in the nearby province, because the dam opened like 7 of their gates. And it was like it's a sea, the river becomes a sea. And the dam that's going to be built is to be, the water will be diverted to that dam who caused the massive flooding, like I think last week. So I posted what happened, the dialogue, and then someone shared it to a Facebook group. And then so I'm seeing like a lot of comments like, oh, this company is so huge, what can you do? Even if you say that you don't like dams and everything, it's a huge company, so better just say yes. But there are people also there who says, yeah, no to dam. But you see, like there's a division. It's like a province-wide Facebook group, and people are saying that they're going to give us irrigation, they're going to give us. They have like a lot of promises. So during the dialogue, it's so hard because you're speaking like with your fellow Indigenous peoples who wants for that dam to continue. So what we did was to partner with other agencies. So there's science agents who did a risk assessment of the project. So during the dialogue, I had to stand up and say, so I respect the decision of people who wants for the dam to continue on, but I'd like also for you to discern that our basis for saying no for the dam is not only because of what my elders are saying will be the impact based on their experiences of what we are seeing now, but also because there is like a scientific based reasons while we are saying no. So it's like kind of a tense moment, but in the end, it's a deadlock even after what's happening right now in the Philippines, that there are still people who wants to continue with the project. But I told people that I speak with that if I don't speak, who will speak out? That there are people who say no to this kind of project, even if we fight like against huge companies. So I was trying to respond to some of the people who posted in Facebook why they're saying that they want the dam to continue. But true that it's hard to go against, like you say, huge company. But as Janine was saying, we should still be speaking out. And like Robbie said, it should be the development plan that we should come up with should come from the community and not come from outside, who will be defining for us what development that we want or the project, energy project that we want to push through. Thank you.
If I could add on the corporate social responsibility, because most of these that are being implemented by companies are quite superficial, no? Because the impact of their projects in the communities are bigger. And once they leave the communities, it's the communities who will be facing, there's no rehabilitation being done after these mining companies, after these dams are stopped. And it's never the same for the communities. Their livelihood, their source of livelihood, and their territories will never be the same with this project. So even if they put up, for example, the solar projects as part of their corporate social responsibility, there's the schools, the clinics, and on, but without really empowering the people to be able to own and manage their territories, it's all superficial. After the company leaves, all of these stops. The schools will not function because there's no support. The solar panels will get destroyed. There's no maintenance. So it's really, I think there has to be a more sustainable way. If communities indeed want to partner with the company, there has to be a more sustainable long-term partnership that would benefit both the community, more the community, because they are the source of the resources that's being extracted, and the company. No, there are some in many indigenous communities now. There are some initiatives to have negotiations, conduct benefit sharing agreements with companies, but I still can see any good practice now of a corporate social responsibility where it really ended into genuine partnership with indigenous communities. And I would also like to highlight the point that Shirley was pointing out on the impacts to indigenous communities is not just environmental. And Ikal also mentioned it has an impact to the identity, but the division that these projects are causing within the communities is irreparable. We saw many communities where even if the project did not push through, those who were in the yes and those who were in the no side never came to an agreement. So the unity within the community cohesion has already been affected by the entry of this project. So these climate solutions that are being proposed, if not processed well among indigenous communities, it would really have an impact not only on the environment, but also on the identity and the cohesion of the community. And that would have an impact on their continuity, because once divided, it's difficult to really unite and again strengthen the community to fight back as one to defend their territories. Janine, you're back.
Yes, yes. This brings me to another question that comes top of mind in this discussion. What are some financing mechanisms or models that can be helpful to ensure that there's proper investment made in building community capacity, and that Indigenous peoples can be involved in the decision-making processes when it comes to these type of energy projects? Is there anything in your territories or your experiences that can lend itself to this conversation? Because this always comes up, right? Like it's about the financing or the resources that are available. And I'm so tired of that. So I'm wondering if there's any financial models that are promising in your regions.
Looks like there's none.
Maybe I can use the opportunity, as we have kind of a little break already, because I have to apologize myself that I need to leave right away, because I will be responsible to open the closing session, which is back to this session. So I use this to warmly invite you all to come to the closing session. And I think maybe Janene, you can present the workshop findings. I can just repost here the guiding questions we have. And I think especially the main findings from the workshop could cover a lot. And I'm really thankful. And I give you the challenge to wrap this up in a few minutes. And I can also post here in the chat the link you would find in the program on to enter the closing session, because it would be great if you all can join this as well. It will. We also prepared a nice musical video for the end of the conference, and it's really worthwhile to stay until the end and see it. So that's from my side. Thank you so much for joining on behalf of the organizing team. I would like to thank you very much, and see you in like 15 minutes in the closing session.
Thank you. Well, I did want to offer that in Canada, out of the Yukon, we have seen some financial partnerships set up with Indigenous peoples to help invest in building community-owned, decentralized, smart grid solar systems in order to help some of the most remote Yukon communities transition away from diesel energy. And so the way that that was set up was that the loan terms were defined by the communities that were accepting the responsibility for the loan. And so they set their own payback schedule. They negotiated favorable loan terms with the investment companies, and they became co-partners in the energy project until the Indigenous peoples could fully assume 100% ownership. And so it's those types of models where with investors and even private philanthropical organizations that really are concerned about real solutions and effective solutions to climate change that can help us build more power and shift these dynamics so that we can create more community-led, designed, implemented, and owned renewable energy projects for Indigenous peoples and for non-Indigenous communities, because this is a problem that extends beyond the boundaries of our lands, territories, and resources. And so we hope as we continue to grow the Right Energy Partnership that we can continue to share these types of models with one another and learn from one another about what is possible and alternative approaches to this type of development. But at this time, I'm going to ask for our speakers to just give one final reflection, and then we'll close our session a few minutes early so that we can have a little break before the final session. Let's start with the order of our presenters. So we'll start with Lulu and then go to Tyrone and Dmitry.
We're very thankful for the opportunity to participate in this workshop, and we are still hopeful that we can contribute to shifting the center of power in our communities.
Thank you, Lulu. Tyrone?
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to this workshop. For me, it's actually a challenge here in the Philippines right now, talking about things like this, like changing ways to provide for people, or yeah, and people taking control, because especially in indigenous communities, initiatives by indigenous peoples and NGOs who work with them are being attacked by government, because yeah, we are mostly linked to communist groups and terror, which the government considers terrorists. So whatever opposition we have against big projects, destructive and extractive industries, we are attacked. They say those are anti-development and yeah, terrorist groups who are saying those kinds of opposition. So I think it's important that indigenous peoples, communities all over the Philippines and the world have conversations such as this, and yeah, and decisions, and especially for development, must come from indigenous peoples themselves for their communities. So yeah, I think may this be a step forward for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyrone. Dmitry?
Thank you very much for organizing this event. It's a very important topic, and I think we all have to pay attention to the issue and problem of the greenwashing, because companies and business and governments try to cover the human rights violation, cover environmental violations, and they try to present a good picture on international level and for investors. And indigenous communities need to create an indigenous, global community need to create and elaborate a new mechanisms how to fight against this fake information. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Ikal? Okay, we might not have Ikal. How about Hama? All right, I know our two colleagues were having connection issues, so perhaps we may have lost them. But with that, thank you so much for spending this afternoon with us and for participating in our dialogue and conversation. We look forward to closing out the entire event with you all at the closing ceremonies. And yes, thank you. Thank you to our presenters again for coming and sharing your knowledge and spending time with us today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, pleasure.
Yeah, and thanks from my side as well on behalf of the organizing team. I mean, Philip was already mentioning it, but we are very grateful for the IPMG SDG group that you were doing these workshops. You had 2 other contributions as well. So we are very grateful, and I'm still overwhelmed of all the stories and the initiatives you were sharing and the thoughts and the struggles. So yes, thank you very much. And we have over 300 registered participants, and we recorded the session. So it will be available for all these people, and we hope that yeah, the speech and the talks will be heard by a lot of them. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. See you later.
Thank you all. Have a great day.